My name is Keel Downey. I'm the research director for the Rule of Law Collaborative at the University of South Carolina. We are an academic interdisciplinary center under the Office of the Provost here that supports research and programming into finding solutions for practical rule of law challenges around the world. And today I'm fortunate to be joined by a special guest, Mr. Seth Oteng, the founder and executive director of the Youth Bridge Foundation based in Accra, Ghana. I and the Rule of Law Collaborative first crossed paths with Seth about 2 years ago when organizing a conference on youth and rule of law issues across the continent, across the sub-Saharan African region. And Seth came as a representative from Ghana to help inform the agenda for that conference and contribute his expertise and connect us with other experts in the region. So he's here on the University of South Carolina campus today, where I've just spent a day with him, which has been a real treat. And I'm just going to ask him a few questions about the work that the Youth Bridge Foundation does and the issues that he's focusing on to try to give you a sense of where the nexus between youth and rule of law is, what areas might be further explored, and what solutions might be possible for the challenges that the young population of the continent face. Seth, I want to start by asking you a question. We've been talking all day long about the youth of Africa, about Africa's young people, and there are different definitions of what that means. And I'm curious, because the youth population of Africa is so large, both in terms of absolute numbers and also as a percentage of the entire continent's population, it's not a homogeneous group. Certainly, so when we talk about Africa's youth in these broad terms, who is it that we're really talking about? Who are we describing?
Thanks so much for having me. And also, I must say a very big thank you to the Rule of Law Collaborative entire team. It's been lovely, fantastic, and I've enjoyed the engagement so far. And more especially, the opportunity to bring the issues of youth development in the continent of Africa to the table. So thanks.
Thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Okay. Now, so back to your question, when we talk about youth in Africa, as rightly said, in terms of percentage of the overall population, it's close to, on the average, it's more than 75% of the continent's population across the continent. That's one, mainly because the definition of youth in the African context is between the age of 15 to 35. No, so when we're talking about the population below the age of 35, then we should be looking at a size that is close to 75% of the continent's population. You have those between the 0 to 15, and then the 15 to 24, and the 24 to 25 percentages. That if you put together, let me say that the 0 to 24 represent close to 40%, and you have the 15 to 25% another percentage. But if you put all of it together, we are heading close to the 75% of the average. And so clearly, and it's projected to double. And in 2050, global statistics authorities have projected the population of Africa to be almost a third of the global population. And Africa is today considered the youngest continent because of the youth population.
And so, you know, when we talk about this youth population in Africa, I would say there's often a sense that, or there's a common narrative or perception that these young people are a risk factor or a source of instability. And at the conference a couple of years ago, I know we talked a lot about the problems with this narrative, with this perception, and how we might be able to flip that around. So I'd be curious to know your thoughts about that.
Let me say that your youth budge, which is the growing youth population in Africa, presents both a threat and an opportunity, depending on how it is handled. If we harness, we at our African Youth and Governance Convergence Initiative, we have persistently talked about the need to harness Africa's demographic dividend. And I would say 2 years ago, 2017, the African Union also had the annual theme of harnessing Africa's demographic dividends. What does that mean? Harness demographic dividends? That clearly sums up to say that we have a youth population that is quite huge, that it was a call for an increased investment into the youth population so that we could harness, we could tap the potential of the African youth. Now, the failure to tap this potential is what poses the risk or the threats. Because, and then how do you harness that? You harness the potential by investing in the youth, education, then investing in their health in terms of their access to justice and that broader sense of faith, employment, and the rest. But let me say here that if we look at the youth and access to justice and handles that well, then it could trigger the positive dimensions of the other aspects of education, access to education, access to employment, access to good health, and the other things that come along with. The failure to harness that, to tap into that, then of course the youth get disappointed. The youth they find themselves at mid sea, not knowing where to go. This is where in the aggression theory there is the risk of the mobilization of content. Someone could easily come in and help get the youth to feel, to understand, to think they are so miserable and there's a systemic failure and that they must push their anger on the systemic failure and be aggressive if they are to have their voices heard. And that is what you talked about, that then the perception comes in to say that they pose risk or they are a threat to the continent's democracy and they are notorious and that. But that is a perception. But the perception, I must say, to some extent, is right as long as we fail to harness the youth potential.
And what are the most effective ways to harness that youth potential? Because you mentioned the need for greater investment in the region's youth, and I assume you mean investment by government authorities, by the private sector, by civil society, by those of the older generations who have the power to make decisions and have their voices heard in these circles. So on the one hand, there would be factors on let's say the supply side that would have to change in order to bring those older generations, those decision makers, closer to the region's youth. And on the other hand, there would have to be some things that would change on the demand side that would bring youth closer to them. So what are the most salient factors in that regard that need to change in order to allow that harnessing to happen?
I'll talk about the African Youth and Governance Convergence Initiative, the theme for this year, that was simply stating or hinting on the fact that partnerships for youth development is the key to mobilizing Africa beyond aid, and is the key to harnessing the continent's youthful population. So governments, let me state here that yes, there's the demand side and there's the supply side. Conventionally, you say there's a demand side, there's a supply side. So demand side, what are responsibilities placed on governments? What are responsibilities placed on the older generation that are supposed to take care of the youth who are at the receiving side of the equation.
Right.
But I would want to introduce another player, other stakeholders, that governments in Africa alone cannot and must not be seen as those responsible to take care of the youth needs. They cannot. And if we're waiting for African governments alone to do that, then we're not going to get it done in the very near future. It's going to take long time. There is the need for us to consider the introduction of corporate Africa. Corporate Africa must be seen as players who have a responsibility in investing in the youth, because you see, business thrives in a peaceful environment. So it's important to introduce them also into the equation. Of course, there's a social contract between government and its citizenry. So the point of call, the first point is, what is government doing and the rest? But I would want to say that let's look at corporates and a collective responsibility. That youth development is a collective responsibility. So that said, we'll have to look at how do we look at education. I would put, of course, most people, if you, from various engagements we've had, you ask youth, what are your aspirations in terms of ranking? You have majority, we've had that discussion today, you have majority saying that, well, it's about employment, it's about job, and creation, and they having the jobs to do, they have employment, and then they'll talk about health, they'll talk about education and other things in that order. But I strongly differ. I strongly have a different position, humility, with due respect, to state that that is a wrong position and wrong arrangement. That unless we have to put education first in Africa, it will be unacceptable to have high dropout rates in education. It will be unacceptable to have majority of Africans' youthful population attaining low levels of education. Now, with low level education, income levels become so low. And if income level is so low, you cannot afford certain services, certain provisions of daily lifestyle. You can't, when the young person gets mature with low income, maybe starts having children, he cannot afford education for the children. So the children are equally affected. So it becomes a cycle of poverty. So I would put the education first to say that let's invest in education, let's make them qualify, let's invest in our human capital from that perspective. If we raise them up, they will earn more and employability would increase, either being employed or being guided to be entrepreneurs, creating jobs on their own and employing other people. That done, then the cycle of poverty, we will be curbing it. And as I mentioned earlier, that the corporate Africa would have a responsibility of joining hands. Corporate social responsibility budgets can be looked at how it will come together in a much more structured format to support education, to increase or to improve progression rates, so that the youth, when we claim we are creating jobs for the youth in Africa, it's not just, it must go beyond just sweeping the streets of Africa into real rich pool of human resource that could generate or inspire and drive our economies. That I would say. And on the supply side, we have to get the youth prepared, conscientize them, let them understand that yes, you may need job today, but if you don't invest in your education, you will remain at this level and your employability will be very low, income level will be very low, and the cycle, we have to work so hard, get them to appreciate, and of course provide some support systems for them in terms of support for their education. It requires sensitization, support to the youth on the supply side, and bringing them up to close the gap to support the, in terms of the demand side, close that gap, bringing them up, and then meeting, advocating for government's responsiveness to their needs, and of course, responsiveness of the corporate Africa, and of course, is parental responsibility. So I'll look at a triangular relationship.
Right.
Yes.
So you're painting a very complex picture here with a lot of different interconnected challenges and also entry points for opportunity. And certainly if education rates, when education rates are low, when dropout rates are high, you have literacy problems, then obviously if we're talking about rule of law, you're talking about a large portion of the population that may not be able to read the law, that may have no understanding of what their civil rights are, what their human rights are. So certainly it's a big rule of law challenge.
Precisely.
But to go back to another point you made, we can't put it all on governments themselves, and the youth will have to take an active role in bringing up their own levels of development. So I'm curious, I know that a big part of what you do through the AYGC and other programming is leadership grooming and mentoring. I'd be curious to know, hear a little bit about your experience doing that and what has been successful in your experience in turning young people from sort of passive recipients to active, positive agents of change in this space.
Thanks. I like the description that changing or working to influence the youth position as passive recipients into active agents of change.
Right.
Let me say, for AYGC, we look at it from 4 levels of, it's a program that has the 4-tier leadership grooming program.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one level is about leadership grooming.
Mm-hmm.
Let me state here that leadership grooming, we do not see everyone to be like political leader,
mm-hmm.
leader of a group, or you must necessarily be student leader, you must necessarily take a leadership position. But we are conscientizing the youth to understand that leadership could mean taking a responsible role.
Right.
Even being a leader over your own self.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing when to wake up, how to be disciplined, how to be punctual, certain life soft skills that are necessary to be responsible. So here we're talking about being responsible youth. So that grooming part in terms of leadership, of course there is that dimension of that political or corporate leadership that they are sensitized, they are groomed and prepared to assume that role. But we recognize that not everyone will be in that position. There must be a leader and there must be a follower. So you can't have everyone leading and who else will follow. So that is the broader scope of looking. But that said, we've heard and seen some young people that we've inspired with the support of our coaches and experts and the people that work with us and various institutions that have come on board with technical support. We've seen some becoming members of parliament in their respective countries, some taking up leadership in terms of corporate ladder. They've moved up and they become responsible. That we look at them with pride. Mm-hmm. Some have initiated their own companies, their own initiatives, and they have staff that they control. And we look at them and we take pride in that. So that is the leadership component. Then you also have the component of the community impact. Having trained them, having given something, we would want the youth that we work with to understand that it is a collective responsibility to help impact our community. Right. So we expect them to go back into their communities and give back. We've seen that happening where some have become volunteers teaching in their respective community, being involved in terms of employment or job creation, being involved in diverse initiatives. Some have looked for support, partnerships, they've come together to undertake various initiatives that we look at it and we take pride. So we've seen some also going back where rural communities where most girls are dropping out of school because of early or teenage pregnancy. They've gone back and introduced education as a way of, and they've mobilized friends to join them to go and support those communities. And we've seen results in that aspect. So the community impact is a critical part that the Youth Brief Foundation equally supports. We challenge, we inspire, and our coaches and our mentors equally provide our technical support. We have another level that is the cascade of mentorship. So you have a situation where the highly professional, the experts who are attached to the organization, mentor the young professionals who have graduated through a program into the younger leadership position in the corporate world. They get mentored by the senior ones, and they in turn support those in the tertiary education. Tertiary education support those in the secondary or the high school level, and those at the high school level go to the basic education level to support.
So everyone's getting leadership skills.
Get some leadership, get some coaching, get some mentorship. When someone finds themselves at, when they come against the wall, there's someone to call, someone to talk to say, how do I handle this situation? And the people to coach and to guide.
Right.
So contact hours might not necessarily be very frequent, but technology, email, calling makes it that easy. So that cascade of mentorship, we've seen it work, and it's a model that we've seen that support improving communities, improving the neighborhood. And of course, the other fourth level is the networking. Through this platform, this engagement through the AYGC, we created a networking platform. And we've had young people who have been together. This year we had the 11th AYGC. And it was refreshing to see some come in who, about 6 years back or 7 years back, mentioned at the conventions that they want to be members of parliament in their respective countries, in Kenya and other places. And today, they came back this year and they are members of parliament. And they, as a matter of fact, stated that they are aspiring to be presidents of our countries. These are connected. And imagine that within the next 6 years, people that have been together for the past 5-7 years are friends. It just takes technology, link up to say, hey guys, I'm here, I'm coming. Is there anyone that someone meets them up? When they find themselves in leadership government positions, imagine the cross-national dialogue, trade negotiations, business, foreign policy negotiations. You will be talking to your friends. So the position of resistance is facilitated through that network and that friendship. And we are building youth front that would want to deepen. I have to admit here that yes, it's looked at the francophone, anglophone, but we are looking at expanding it to the lusophone African countries, bringing them on board, initially because of language barrier, because of the Portuguese.
It's a big logistical challenge.
Exactly.
To have all these different languages.
Exactly. So we needed to deepen and get settled. But I think we're ready to now bring the lusophone African countries and include Portuguese. Hopefully next day going, we should have the Portuguese introduced. And of course, we would expand and deepen engagement with North Africa. And hopefully 4 years down the line, we should have the different blocks, the Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, and of course the Northern African bloc done. It's a process. And I have to admit that we're working towards.
But you're seeing results. You're seeing success.
And that is what inspires us on and keeps us. 11 years down the line, each year has always just been better and improved upon the previous year.
Great.
Yes.
I have one more sort of big picture question for you, which is, earlier today you and I were talking about the importance of making sure that when donors or other organizations who are trying to help provide solutions to challenges in rule of law, access to justice, and other areas, when they come in, that the terminology and the assumptions and the understanding that they have align with those of the people who are the beneficiaries of the assistance that they're providing.
Precisely.
And it's not always the case that those who are trying to come in and help mean the same thing as the local population when they talk about what a justice problem is or what access to justice looks like. And so I'm curious, from your experience either in Ghana or in other countries in Africa, what is your sense that the youth population, what are the key areas that they would see as justice challenges or justice problems?
Youth and rule of law and access to justice. It is easy to think that the West, because of course, funding, said, well, we would want to support access to justice, we want to support rule of law across Africa. And they just pick concepts, perception of what the situation is, and dump it in Africa, thinking that is the way to go. I'll cite some examples on where for it. Of course, there is a problem of maybe accessing court cases and technology digitizing issues, which is very useful, but I would say it's part of the problem. So it is important to understand that the perception of rule of law and access to justice might not necessarily be what is being picked in the West and dumped on Africa. What I would advocate for is an understanding of what really is understanding of the youth in Africa, of what rule of law is. We need to understand that. That is one. Secondly, what do they want? What is their need? So as we were discussing earlier today, we need to understand that context. What do they want? Access to justice to them possibly might not necessarily be, yes, the judicial systems are there, but the person's first looking at how they can advance to understand even the justice and meaning education. Their right to education, the right to employment, right to certain things that in terms of ranking to the youth might be prioritized. So I think there must be a little more study. I would recommend a study into perceptions of what and the understanding of what rule of law and access to justice mean to the African youth, number one.
Right.
And to what do they want and what do they expect? What is their need? So that we don't make the mistake of designing a concept, an initiative, and dumping it on Africa. Otherwise, we will not be maximizing the benefits, the intended benefits of youth and access to justice within the context. There is a lot, we still have a long way to go, and there are a lot of gray areas that we'll have to touch on. Their understanding, it's of course the literacy level. So if the person cannot read, does not appreciate the legal issues, and we are, as we say in Ghana and Nigeria and West Africa and some of the countries, is that you come and you speak the big English. So that means that eloquently speaking and defining this concept, they are lost. So how well do we bring it to the level and understanding of majority of the youthful population? Come to think of it, this population, majority live in the rural areas. So how do we connect them, the rural community, rural youth? Do we connect them to the whole youth and access to justice agenda for an enhanced SDG goal 16 emphasizes on an inclusive, the building of an inclusive, of a just,
peaceful, inclusive, and justice.
Yes, of a peaceful, inclusive, and a just society. If we are, and I would agree with the position that this is an entry point to achieve the other goals. If we achieve this, and everyone sees that it is mine, on the demand side, I know this is my right, I demand the right, and supply side, it is provided, and we have that. Then we have education, we have employment, we have all of the other issues. There's a gender in access to justice, youth and access to justice, education, employment, climate change, different dimensions that can be looked at. And I would think that youth and access to justice is important, but we need to look at it in the context of the African understanding and their expectation and what they really want out of that. And that requires a study. And maybe I may want to task Rob to look into that. If that is something that we could look into, that would be fantastic. That would serve not only Ghana and also across Africa. And then we will be advancing very useful agenda, and bringing the youth on board to appreciate and understand that these are the rights that they can demand, and we will be building an inclusive and a just global society.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that, and you've certainly given us a lot to think about. Where could those who are interested in learning more about Youth Bridge Foundation and the AYGC go to learn more?
Thank you very much. The Youth Bridge Foundation, before I respond to that, let me say that we recognize the fact that the youth, it's we don't deal with the youth as a homogeneous group, but as a heterogeneous group. So for us at Youth Bridge Foundation, it is a heterogeneous group of male and female agenda. Now, that is one. Two, persons with disability, young persons with disability are very critical and dear to us, our hearts. And in terms of our programming, yes, we want to be gender balanced, but we want to make sure that it is inclusive of persons with disability. That said, we have made sure that we come up with innovative programs, initiatives that are friendly to translate policies and initiative, government agenda into youth-friendly formats, including producing some in movies. We've translated documents into Brave version with the support of OSIWA and various organizations. We've produced, again, with the support of OSIWA, the movie series, the child and family welfare policies that deal with almost the social life or issues bordered around the entire community. Captured that in a 13-week series in a movie with sign language interpretation of whatever audio versions of that. So we undertake innovative ways to translate policy documents. This is something I would want to recommend for other agencies, other organizations to consider if we would want to reach out to majority of the young persons, including persons with disability, and those who might not have the competence or the capacity to read the complicated documents that even educated may read and cannot understand. So that is something I want to say in passing. The Youth Bridge Foundation is presented at www.youthbridgefoundation.org. You have the opportunity to read about everything else we do. Our contact details are available on the website. Great. And the African Youth and Governance Convergence, which is a continental initiative and also mobilizes the diaspora youth to connect with Africa. You could go to the www.aygconvergence.org and read about us, and you get all the details. And
great.
We'll be more than happy to respond to inquiries. Our contact details are available, and we look forward to engaging.
Wonderful, thank you. So if this is an issue you're interested in learning more about, please, you should check out the Youth Bridge Foundation's website and the AYGC's website, as well as the Rule of Law Collaborative's website, rolcsc.org. And thank you very much.
Thanks. Well.